I was going to open with a question, but it's so absurdly obvious that it feels like it should be a statement instead. I was going to say, have you ever felt weary or abandoned, that sort of thing? But the truth is, everyone has. There's no escape from that sense of even getting down to despair sometimes. Everyone's felt it. And that's part of the roller coaster of life. And it means traveling through the highest highs and then feeling the bottom drop out. As I thought about this metaphor for roller coasters, I searched my own memory. It may be hard to believe, but it's been a while since I've been to an amusement park. But I do remember going to Busch Gardens and riding the Loch Ness Monster, which, according to the internet, is still a thing. And so, to refresh my memory, I went to the wonder of YouTube and took a first-person view of riding the Loch Ness Monster, and it all came back to me. Through the mists of time, I was able to remember being a teenager and riding that roller coaster. Right out of the gate. As soon as it leaves the little building where they've got all, I don't know if they still do, but they used to have all these faux explorer decorations, like you're getting ready to go look for the Loch Ness Monster. And then somehow, I guess, getting on the roller coaster is a part of that narrative. I don't know. They didn't consult me or explain further their decorations. But you leave the little building and you ride out and immediately begin an ascent. Click, 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 up, 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 and then there's a turn and it drops. Roller coasters are a great metaphor for life because they've got those twists and turns. They go fast and there are slow bits and they go up and down, heaven knows, like life does. Life has its ups and downs, and the ups can be amazing. I received a text yesterday morning that an operation had gone well from somebody who I deeply care about. I really love this person, and they were supposed to have an operation on Friday. It was delayed, and sort of going to bed Friday night, that was the last we had heard. And Saturday morning, I received a text that the operation had proceeded sometime in the night, and it went well, and she's recovering. Another high comes from that feeling when the power has been out. Those of us who live here in Virginia often know this feeling, especially when the weather is a bit like this and the wind and the ice begins to gather on trees and it's been raining, so the ground's nice and wet, and then a pine tree decides to take the power out for an entire neighborhood. That high comes when those folks, the friendly folks from Dominion Power, go and restore power, and you're sitting there in your increasingly cold house, and all of a sudden the lights go on, and you immediately realize how many times you walked into a room and flipped a light switch on, forgetting that the power's out, and suddenly it's all back. Everyone feels good when the news breaks that wildland firefighters get the Los Angeles wildfire under control. That will be another one of those highs. But along with those ups come the downs. Not every illness has a cure. Storms take lives, and wildfires leave a path of death and destruction in their wake. Up, down, fast, slow, life is like a roller coaster. For the ancient Israelites, returning from captivity, there was this high feeling of getting back to the promised land. We've made it. We're no longer in the Babylonian captivity. But that immediately was followed by the low of realizing that the death and destruction in the promised land was still there. The exile was over. They were back from Babylon, yet things weren't back to normal. The path of rebuilding is slow. And our Old Testament lesson begins, "For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent." Now, if this proclamation is the voice of the prophet, then "I will not keep silent" is a demand for vindication. God, hear me in my despair, hear me in my depths of being in isolation. But what if instead of it being the prophet calling out to God, this is actually God's voice? If it's God who won't keep silent, then these words offer God's comfort to anyone who has ever felt the rug pulled out from under them. Having read arguments for both readings, whether from Isaiah or the prophet or from God's voice, it seems more convincing that Isaiah 62 reflects God's speech for humanity to hear, not just the ancient Israelites, but for us here today. The promise of this lesson is that God is doing a new thing. The lows aren't the end. In our weariness, in our abandonment, in our sense of despair, God is right there with us, working and offering to bring us out of it and to a broad place. The great liberation theologian Gustavo Gutierrez, who actually died just last year at 94 years old in his home city of Lima, Peru. Gutierrez writes, God is not a severe and despotic God, but rather the bridegroom and the friend who can love with tenderness and passion and who can delight in the love of God's people. We have a relationship with a loving God. And that's how we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God isn't severe or a despot. God is a loving friend who is there for us no matter what's happening. When we enter this relationship, we don't just keep it, we extend it to others. And as a community, you and I, we lift one another up. We extend the grace we've received from God to one another and to the world around us, and this forms a faith family. Isaiah used this wedding metaphor, which is a common image in Hebrew scripture, in addition to places in Isaiah 56 and all the way through 66. We see Israel or Jerusalem depicted as God's spouse in Hosea, Jeremiah, Lamentations. But the symbolism is no more about marriage than the wedding at Cana, and our reading in John, was about the bride and groom. The wedding metaphor in Isaiah 62, as well as in John, is about a covenant. It's about somebody entering into a covenant relationship. And that relationship transcends the two people and becomes an explicit expression of God's covenant with humanity and the earth. It says, no more will you be called forsaken. Our reading says, you're not going to be declared desolate anymore. Your land is in this covenant. Isaiah speaks to that roller coaster of life and offers a promise. The lows aren't the end. In Isaiah, God promises something new, something good and rich. The Lord delights in you. In John, we find another example of starting something new. At the wedding at Cana, Jesus doesn't appear ready to begin his ministry. But like so many parents who may have a better sense of timing than their children, Mary ignores him. Woman, what concern is this of yours? By turning the water into wine, Jesus is off to the races, and humanity can experience the divine through a covenant of love and restoration. The wine in this moment is the entry point in John to this new covenant. Ernesto Cardenal was a Catholic priest in the Solentiname Islands on Lago Cociboca in Nicaragua. And during Mass, he would read the gospel lesson and ask these largely illiterate people who fished and farmed on these little islands to comment. And as he started doing that in this isolated part of Nicaragua, he put a tape recorder on the table and recorded what they said, and ended up editing it into the multi-volume work, The Gospel in Solentiname. And in the entry on John chapter 2, this reading about the wedding in Cana, a man named Pablo Hurtado commented, The conversion of the purification water into wine is also a symbol of the conversion of the legalistic law into a law of love. If all the water they had for purifying themselves now turned into wine, how were they going to perform their ceremonies? And I'm sure that one of them must have said, "Master, how do I purify myself now?" And Jesus must have answered, "The orders are to have a drink." We want rules, and God offers a party. We want lists of who's in and who's out, who belongs and who doesn't, and God says, "I love everyone. Everyone is welcome." Instead of making those lists, love your neighbor as yourself. Isaiah recognized the complexity of returning from Babylon, and at first coming home seemed perfect, but that was the idea of coming home, the concept of getting back. They thought it was going to be perfect, but instead they found the aftermath of having been taken over. And it's easy to imagine a perfect past. It's tempting to want to go home again. The ancient Israelites discovered that was impossible. We only go forward. We only go into what's next. We only get to do what is ahead of us. Just like the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, change is constant. But instead of accepting this movement forward into new versions of the present, like the ancient Israelites, we often want to go back to some imaginary, idealized, best-case scenario past. In Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, right at the end, Willy Wonka tells Charlie, "Don't forget what happened to the one who suddenly got what they wanted." Charlie said, "What?" And Willy said, "They lived happily ever after." Except life's more complicated than that. And that's what the ancient Israelites discovered here in Isaiah 62. Stories need that happily ever after. Stories need to wrap everything up with a bow and have it nicely work out. Life means picking up the pieces. It means cleaning up after a wildfire and rebuilding after destruction. Going back is impossible. In John 2, at the wedding, Jesus and his friends were supposed to be guests. Someone invited them to the wedding, but then Jesus became the host. After turning the water into the wine, he invited others to enjoy the party. And today he invites us to get to know him, to join him at the holy feast and be light in the world. There is hope, no matter what's happening, no matter how dark the darkness is, no matter how low the low is, there is hope. When we explore the transformational work in Isaiah 62 and John 2, we find a journey in which we're not alone. And no matter what is happening, God is with you. Each of us can decide what we're going to do with that promise. We can celebrate the highs with those who are around us. We can lift each other up in our lows. Be the light. Find someone who is having trouble and lift them up. Affirm them, encourage them, and show them what it looks like when someone loves them. Recently, I was talking with someone, and she said something very kind. And I said, "That was very kind." And she said, "I'm trying to be affirming." And in that moment, I saw the light of Christ in the world. It's that easy, and you can do it. Amen.